I wish we had some frat boys that would go and save George Washington, take that garbage off him.
I would.
Wouldn't that be beautiful?
I'd get arrested for that.
Yeah, you would. All right, more bad news for old Joe's economy. The U.S. added just 175,000 jobs in April, far short of the 240,000 economists had expected.
But that's not the full story. Take a look at this. The labor participation rate is still well below the trends before the pandemic. But that did not stop Biden's deputy labor secretary from telling our own Ed Lawrence that Biden's economic strategy is, in fact, going according to plan.
This is steady, stable growth. This is 175,000 jobs created at the same time that the unemployment rate is now under 4% for 27 months straight. We continue to see broad-based growth. We always talked about getting to a more steady state, and the 175,000 from last month and the average for a little over 240,000 over the last 3 months is very much continued sign that President Biden's economic strategy is working.
Here with reaction, Heritage Foundation economist EJ Antoni. EJ, your reaction to that gobbledy-whoops, and also just the number of people who are, millions of people who are missing from the labor force, and what that means for the United States today and in the days ahead.
Well, Dagan, that chart that you showed, we see the exact same pattern, whether we're looking at the employment to population ratio, whether we're looking at the establishment survey's payroll figures or the employment number from the household survey. They all show this massive decrease. In other words, we are short millions of workers right now, people who have left the workforce and have never returned. Well, guess what? If you put them back into your unemployment rate calculation, you don't have an unemployment rate of 3.9%. It's somewhere between 6.5 and 7.7, depending on which methodology you want to use. So the idea that somehow the labor market is just going along swimmingly right now, I think that's hogwash.
No, it is hogwash. All right, EJ, let's move on to this. Because the New York Times columnist absolutely perplexed by America's feeling nostalgic about Trump's economy, reminding people of how bad the economy was because of the pandemic, arguing that if Trump gets a pass for a struggling economy during COVID, Biden should too. Quote, why shouldn't Biden get a similar pass for problems that manifested on his watch, but surely reflected delayed effects of COVID disruptions? You know, EJ, I think the problem here is Americans look at the 3 years before COVID of Donald Trump, and they were like, listen, I had more opportunity, I was making more money, inflation was under control, I could buy a house, interest rates were low. And, you know, Joe Biden has had basically 3 years since the pandemic, or to Dagan's point, 3.5 years, and he can't get his act together. People are still struggling to pay the mortgage, put gas in their car, and food on their table. This is just another liberal economist trying to pull cover for Joe Biden.
Sean, I think that's a great summary. You know, it wasn't Trump who created a virus in a lab in Wuhan, China, and then unleashed it on the world. So maybe that has something to do with why Americans don't blame him for the economic disaster that was 2020. But that aside, the economy was actually recovering very quickly, as you pointed out earlier in the show, at the end of 2020. The economy was growing at an annualized rate of $1.5 trillion a year. Inflation was 1.4%, and Biden completely wrecked the recovery. Why? Because it was his policies that were put in place on his watch that turned that fast growth and slow inflation on its head, to where we now have the economy growing half as quickly in the last quarter as in the fourth quarter of the previous year, and the inflation rate doubled quarter over quarter.
So the only conclusion to be drawn, EJ, is this is intentional. This is the economy that Biden and his cronies want, one that inflicts suffering and hardship on the many in exchange for handouts for the few who really don't need it. It's economic fascism, and it's all about control.
I think, again, that's a very good summary, Dagan. You know, if you are a member of the elite, if you went into the Biden administration with a lot of equities, with a lot of stocks, with a lot of assets like housing, all of those things have inflated very, very highly. And so their prices have risen. Those folks are doing just fine. If you're on the other extreme, the other end, where you're receiving a lot of government benefits, you're living on the dole, those benefits have been expanded. You're also doing just fine under Biden. Biden. It's middle America. It's the folks in between that have gotten absolutely crushed by his hidden tax of inflation, and they have seen their jobs not go back to themselves after the economy was reopened, but instead they've watched their jobs go to foreign-born workers.
No doubt about that. EJ Antoni, always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
Great to see you, EJ, always.